Hello and welcome to my world. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different type of video compared to my previous ones. And this video will be a discussion of the changes in full-scale monster trucks and how those changes were reflected in the aftermarket chassis and suspension kits that became available for the Tamiya Clod Buster. And this video came about because of some of the comments I received about the ESP King Clod truck shown here on the left. And I think some of those comments that people left regarding that truck were from people that either weren't paying attention to the RC or full-scale monster truck industries through the years, or people who, quite frankly, just simply were not alive at the time that trucks like the ESP King Clod were being built. So hopefully this video will kind of fill in the blanks and answer a few questions from people who just honestly didn't know much about Clod Buster modifications and how they changed through the years. Now, if you go back and look at pictures of monster trucks from the mid-1980s up until the early 1990s, they basically looked like the King Clod here on the left. And full-scale monster trucks at that time were basically kind of like show trucks on steroids. So if you look at the monster trucks at that time, trucks like USA 1, the first Bigfoot, Excalibur, and Samson, they look a lot like what you see here, or they look a lot like a stock Tamiya Clod Buster. They were big, they were tall, they were slow, and they had lots of shock absorbers, and they didn't have a lot of suspension wheel travel. Now, the full-scale monster trucks, unlike the Clod Buster, the full-scale monster trucks had leaf spring suspension systems on them, and of course the Tamiya Clod Buster has coil-over shock absorbers on it. So it's a little bit different, but as far as the overall look and performance, stock Clod Busters very much look similar and perform just like their full-scale counterparts that were driving around at the time the Clod Buster came out in 1987. So when people started modifying their Clod Busters by around 1988 and up through the early 1990s, the modified Clod Busters at that time, if you look at RC Car Action magazine, at their project trucks, and even in the Reader's Ride section of the people that modified their Clod Busters that sent in their photos, their trucks look similar to what you see here. The ESP King Clod really looks like a truck of its time. It has lots of shock absorbers per wheel. It's really tall. It's really slow. It doesn't really perform well as far as high speed handling and jumping and lots of axle articulation and lots of wheel travel. It basically is what 1988 and early 90s modified Clod Busters look like. So if you fast forward to 1990, that's when everything changed in the world of monster trucks, because that's when Bigfoot 8 came out. And Bigfoot 8 has a multi-link suspension system with cantilevers, and those changes really had a ripple effect all through not only the full-scale monster truck industry, because next you know, guys are building trucks similar to that with multi-link suspensions and stuff like that, lots of wheel travel, lots of axle articulation, but also it had a trickle-down effect on the RC monster truck industry too. So ESP started coming out with multi-link suspension kits and cantilevers on the suspensions of their monster truck kits. So you can see that in the ESP Clodzilla IV, which is on my Gravedigger truck right here. It has a 4-link suspension system on each axle, has lots of wheel travel, lots of axle articulation, and it has suspension cantilevers, very similar to Bigfoot 8, which preceded the Clodzilla IV by a few years. But before the Clodzilla IV, there was also the Clodzilla III, which was a multi-link suspension system for the Clodzilla, and also the ESP came out with a 4-link suspension kit for the good old Clodzilla II chassis, which that's the chassis that's on the King Clod, but the King Clod does not have the 4-link suspension kit on it. It has a traditional ladder bar style Clod Buster suspension. But basically all those changes that were happening in the full-scale monster truck industry were also affecting the Clod Buster aftermarket suspension and chassis kits that were being released at the time. So ESP, who was one of the earliest companies that made aftermarket suspension parts for the Clod Buster, ESP started reflecting those changes too in their chassis kits. If you look here, these are 3 of my ESP catalogs. On the left is the catalog from about 1988 or 1989. That's my original catalog. The one in the middle is from 1994, and the one on the far right is from 2000. So if you notice, the catalog on the left, of course, has the King Clod on it, because that's what the type of trucks that people were building at that time. They look just like that. The one in the middle, that's a Clodzilla III chassis and suspension kit. And then on the right, that is a Clodzilla IV truck on the cover. And if you notice, the truck on the left, the King Clod, look at how tall it is. It's really high. Not all about performance. Didn't have a lot of suspension travel or axle articulation. And then all of a sudden, look at the catalog pictures in the middle and on the right. Notice how low those trucks are to the ground. Those trucks are more about high-speed racing, lots of suspension travel, and lots of axle articulation. And that's what was happening in the full-scale monster truck industry at the time too. People were building trucks that more looked like the Clodzilla III and the Clodzilla IV. They kind of abandoned the trucks like you see on the far left that had really were, as I said, glorified show trucks basically. So some people were also asking me, why didn't I, the Clodzilla, the King Clod, why didn't I change it? Why didn't I update it? Why not make it, it's so slow, it's so outdated. Oh my God, the suspension is so stiff. Why didn't you update it? Well, yeah, I could have done all that sort of things, but I guess I didn't make it clear in my video on the King Clod that I wanted to preserve the truck as it was. It's a look back into a certain time frame of Clod Buster modifications that really doesn't exist anymore. And I wanted to keep that era alive. And also, keep in mind, I have the truck on the right. If I want high-speed fun, if I want to jump and I want to go rock crawling and have tons of wheel travel and axle articulation, I can just charge up the batteries on my Clodzilla IV Gravedigger on the right, and I can drive that truck around as much as I want to. But if I want to go back in time and enjoy a type of truck that would be built in the late 80s, all I have to do is charge up the batteries on the King Clod and drive around in that. So I have both worlds right here. And I also have my bullhead trucks too. And those are also based on older trucks, so I can also drive any one of those if I want to go back in time. So I have the best of all worlds right here. So I hope that kind of helps explain why these trucks are the way they are, and also how RC monster trucks, or the Clodzilla and Clod Buster modified trucks, really are a reflection of the changes that were happening in the full-scale monster truck industry at the time. And if anybody has any questions about that, please let me know, or just leave a comment below and I'll answer any questions. But also keep in mind, I never worked for ESP. I never worked in the hobby industry, so all of this information is just coming from somebody who has been a lifelong fan of the Tamiya Clod Buster and has gone through all the different changes and different styles of modifications through the years. So my perspective is just strictly from somebody who was on the outside of the RC industry. Just a fan, just a crazy fan, if you will, and somebody who just loves these trucks, but I never designed any of the trucks. I never worked for ESP or any other RC car manufacturer in the day. So my opinions here are just strictly that, just the opinions from one guy. Oh, before I sign off too, one other thing I almost forgot to mention is that sometimes people have asked me through the years, why was there never a Clodzilla IV? They only sold the Clodzilla V. They only made the Clodzilla and sold the Clodzilla IV chassis kit, but why was there never a Clodzilla V? Actually, they did. ESP made one prototype truck called the Clodzilla V, and it raced at the CTPA World Finals. And it actually won the modified class World Championships in 1999, 2000, and 2001. But it was never sold to the public. And it was driven by a guy named Bill Herzog, and you can look on the CTPA website and you can actually see his name listed there as winning the modified class World Championships in 99, 2000, and 2001, and he was driving the Clodzilla V. I have a few photos of that truck, but I don't have permission to publish those anywhere, so I just have them saved away. But if anybody knows where the Clodzilla V prototype truck is today, please let me know. I'd be very interested in adding it to my collection, but I have never seen the truck in person and I have no idea where it is today. But it was interesting looking design. It was kind of what was popular in the late 90s and early 2000s because it had, instead of having suspension cantilevers, it had the shock absorbers mounted to the lower suspension links. A design that was, as far as I know, was pioneered by the Powers chassis and became really popular when ThunderTech Racing came out with their Ripper chassis a few years later. But the Clodzilla V looked like a really cool chassis, and I'd love to add it to my collection. So, or if anybody knows where it is, please just let me know. Even if it's not for sale, I'd just be curious about where it is today and what became of it. So anyway, so those are just a little bit of information for people that maybe weren't alive at the time that these types of trucks were coming out through the years, and or maybe people that just didn't know, just weren't paying attention to monster trucks, either full scale or RC at the time. So I realize not everybody is obsessed with this sort of stuff like I am, or I was at the time. So hopefully this video will help fill in the blanks a little bit and answer some people's questions about why the King Clod looks the way it does and why I haven't changed it and I don't want to change it. So hope this video helps answer a few questions out there. So I'll catch you in the next video.